Hi guys. Okay, we are back. Second semester, we are starting with the cardiovascular system, and I'm actually starting with blood because that's obviously a huge part of the cardiovascular system. And so we're going to run through the components, kind of a little unit before we get to like the heart and the veins and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so first off, just a little bit about the cardiovascular system. Its job is to carry oxygen and nutrients to every living cell in your body and then remove the waste, pick up the waste products, the CO2, and get it back out somehow. And the big part of this is the blood because it is the actual carrier. It's the only fluid tissue that's in your body. It has all kinds of different parts to it, which we'll talk about. But it is pumped by the heart, which again we'll go into much more detail on, and then contained within a closed tube system, which are the arteries and the veins. Okay, so blood, has several functions. First off, distribution, food, oxygen. It also is carrying the waste, transports hormones, which are chemical signals that your body sends to different parts to do different things. It also regulates several things, regulates your body temperature. It's the reason that your face turns kind of flushed if you're hot. It's trying to get rid of some of the heat. It is regulating pH. Blood is a buffer, essentially, and so that means it tries to help pH stay kind of where it already is. And then it also helps with like a fluid volume, which essentially is like your blood pressure. Protects you against blood loss through clotting and platelets. It also is part of your immune system and prevents infections. It does a lot. Okay, so now the components of the blood, you've got formed elements, which are living cells, and then you have plasma. Okay, so clearly from the picture, you can tell the yellow up there is the plasma, so there's a little bit more of that, approximately 55% of your blood versus the living stuff. And the formed elements have three different parts. The erythrocytes, which are red blood cells, their job is to carry oxygen. This is approximately 45% of your blood. Then you have the leukocytes and the platelets. So on that little picture, that little white band, that's where the white blood cells are, and that's where the platelets are. And so they are typically less than 1% of your total blood volume. It's one of the things, though, that they do measure when they take blood is the percentage of white blood cells. A higher percent than normal typically means you have an infection of some kind, so that's what they check on a lot of those things. Okay, now starting off, lots of writing on this page, so sorry. The erythrocytes, so these are the red blood cells. Tiny little cells. They don't have a nucleus, they don't have a lot of organelles. They're kind of short-term cells, and they have one big component, or what they are actually kind of filled with, is hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is a protein that carries the oxygen. It works in the transportation, and a red blood cell contains about 250 million hemoglobin molecules. A lot for just one red blood cell. And they can each bind with 4 molecules of oxygen, which means that one red blood cell carries about 1 billion oxygen molecules, which totally is weird to me. I can't even visualize that big a number in that small a thing, but there you go. Remember, you got a lot of cells, and they need a lot of oxygen because you need it almost continuously for cellular respiration, and so that's typically, obviously while you're breathing, but you need lots of oxygen all the time. Most adult humans have somewhere between 20 and 30 trillion red blood cells, so it's about 25% of your total number of cells, so lots of them. Shape-wise, they are biconcave, which means they kind of indent on both sides. So they're thicker around the edges, I guess, is a good way to say it. But they have kind of flat, disc-like shape. It allows them to kind of squish a little bit so they can move through very small tubes. And then they have a large surface area because they're kind of flat, so you can have a good transfer of gases. Typically, a red blood cell lasts about 3 months. Usually just kind of wear and tear causes it to no longer be useful. And when that happens, very often it is kind of filtered out by your spleen. And so, and then taken out of rotation, and your body breaks it down. But anyway, so about 3 months lifespan. This is the number of red blood cells contributes to your blood viscosity. It is again one of those things I kind of measure and look at. Red blood cells are produced in the red bone marrow, usually are producing somewhere around the rate of 2 million cells per second, and this is controlled by the amount of iron that you have in your body. It's a component of the hemoglobin molecules, vitamin B in your body. So those are 2 important things to have. And then your hormones kind of tell your body what to do. Okay, so some red blood cell disorders. First off, anemia, which we've talked about a little bit. This is when you don't have, your blood doesn't carry a lot of oxygen. And there are multiple causes for this, but if you have lost too much blood, of course, you have then not enough red blood cells. If you have some sort of infection that causes the red blood cells to burst, of course, now that I'm doing my video, I can't think of any, but there are some, which I'll try and remember to look at before we talk in class. You do have some hemoglobin or red blood cell abnormalities, like sickle cell anemia or thalassemia, and that again is kind of a misshapen red blood cell, so it just doesn't have as many as much space for the hemoglobin. People can have get the wrong blood type when they have a blood transfusion. You have different drugs, different toxins, radiation can destroy red blood cells. You can also just have a poor diet. You don't get enough iron, you don't get enough B12. So lots of different causes. Another one kind of opposite is polycythemia. And this is when you have too many red blood cells. And your blood's thick, essentially. It can be caused by bone marrow cancer. Remember, typically cancer is kind of out of control cell growth. So now you're just producing too many red blood cells. Living at higher altitudes, your body will naturally adjust when you go to some place like Denver. If you stay there long enough, because there's not as much oxygen in the atmosphere, your body will adjust by making more red blood cells. But then if you go back home, come back to Bartlesville, you have more red blood cells than you need. And so you have this condition. Your body will eventually, it will level out. And so that's not a big deal. There is a practice called blood doping, where athletes will draw their own blood before a competition, like 2 or 3 days beforehand, and then re-inject that their own blood right before a competition. More red blood cells means more oxygen, means more oxygen for your muscles, means better competition, supposedly. Okay, now moving on, the next living component is a leukocyte, and these are white blood cells. They are much bigger than red blood cells. They've got nuclei, they've got all the organelles, they are just a normal cell, but not as many, not near as many as the red blood cells. They are working to defend your body against anything that shouldn't be there. Bacteria, viruses, parasites, tumors, toxins, and they move within the circulatory system, within your blood vessels, but they can also move through tissues if they need to get to the site of infection, the damage, wherever it is. So they can leave the leave the blood vessels and move into tissue. Now, depending on the type, they can live for just a few hours up to several months. And they are in 2 categories: granulocytes, where they have a membrane-bound granulocyte, and a granulocyte, which means I don't have granulocytes. Granulocytes typically are just little kind of internal packages that help them break down or destroy whatever they are attacking. Okay, so first off we have the neutrophil, and there's a little picture of it. So it is the one with the dark purple in it. These are cells that work to ingest or to eat bacteria. And so they just kind of surround it, engulf it, bring it in, then destroy it when it's been engulfed. All right, then we have the eosinophil. These work to kill parasitic worms, and they kind of work the same way. They surround the worm, they release these enzymes that dissolve the worm, destroy it, break it down, and it is gone. I would guess that these are not, depending on what country you live in, all those kinds of things, the levels of these varies greatly between people. Then you have a basophil. This is the least abundant of the white blood cells. It typically is just a signal to other white blood cells that there's something wrong. They release the histamine. And so if you take something like an antihistamine, because that's your body reacting to an allergen or dust in the air, whatever it is, these are the cells that say, hey, we need help. They don't really do anything. They're just the ones that are like, come and help us. But if you can stop the release of that histamine, if it's not necessary, then it can lessen your body's reaction to it. So that's why they put it like if you have trouble with allergies. Okay, now the agranulocytes. The big one on this is the lymphocytes. These are the second most numerous white blood cells. These are mostly found in your lymph nodes, where you have like lymph nodes, back kind of at the corner of your jaw, under your ears, in your armpits, your groin. And these are broken down into T lymphocytes or B lymphocytes. And the T lymphocytes work against virus-infected cells and also tumor cells. Their only job is to determine if a virus has invaded a cell or if it's a tumor cell, out of control growth, and destroying them. They are very, very general. They will destroy anything. But then you have B lymphocytes, and these produce antibodies. And an antibody is a chemical that works against a very specific threat. Every time you get sick, your body will produce some B lymphocytes against that specific virus or bacteria, whatever it is. It's the reason that you get vaccines. A vaccine is a kind of a weak version of an illness, and it causes your body to build these B lymphocytes or produce these B lymphocytes, so that if you actually get the real sickness, then your body is already has some of these cells, or is ready to make these cells in order to defend you. Okay, then we have monocytes. Size-wise, these are the biggest. They work in tissues, and they are macrophages. Macrophage means big eater, essentially. And so they are working against chronic infections like tuberculosis, chronic virus issues. They also will activate the lymphocytes. So if they are active, then they will say, hey, come help me come help me destroy whatever this is. And so these typically are, again, just kind of defensive, obviously, but kind of specialized. Okay, now white blood cell disorders, leukocyte disorders. Leukemia is a cancer of the white blood cells, and leukemia causes problems with your bone marrow, and your bone marrow is not producing the cells that it should. And leukemia can be acute, very quickly advancing, or chronic, very slow. And typically the cancer itself is not the bad part, it's just that your white blood cells are not very functional. And so you are much more likely to get sick. So that's just kind of damage or a poorly made white blood cell. Then you have infectious mononucleosis. We typically call it mono. It's a very contagious virus, and it results in your body making overproducing some of these agranulocytes. And so your body just typically, thinks it is sick, and so you're making all of these white blood cells. There's no real cure for it. Typically, people just feel really tired when they have mono, just kind of run down. The only real treatment is rest. They will a lot of times see if it's a more advanced case, like enlargement of the spleen, because all of these excessive agranulocytes are getting filtered out in your spleen, and so your spleen will enlarge somewhat. But it's not necessarily dangerous, but it does run you down a lot. Okay, now platelets. So platelets are the last part of the living components, and these are cytoplasmic fragments of megakaryocyte cells. And they contain little granules, little grains that are filled with all kinds of stuff: serotonin, calcium, different enzymes, ADP, so they can, very easily become ATP, growth factors, and all those things give them the ability to kind of stick to other things, stick to each other, and they will stick to a damaged piece or a tear in a blood vessel and form like just a little kind of a plug. They stop the blood from flowing out of the blood vessel where it shouldn't. And this stoppage of bleeding is called hemostasis. And you have several stages. First, you have vascular spasms, and this is where the blood vessel will start to constrict, and so it slows the blood flow. The chemicals around, or the tissues around the damage, the cells around the damage, release chemicals, and that causes that constriction. And then you have the platelet sticking to the fiber, sticking to each other and forming this plug. And again, various chemicals continue to enhance the spasms. They send out a signal, bring more platelets to the area. And so the plug starts to form. And then you have coagulation. And this is where the blood itself goes from a liquid to a gel. Long series of chemical reactions that take place here, which we won't go into detail on, but it's a really quick process in the grand scheme of things, but it is lots of steps to it. Okay, and then last thing, hemostasis disorders, so problems with clotting or not clotting. So the first one, thromboembolic conditions. This is where you have clots forming that you don't want. And these are seen internally at times when the blood vessels are rough on the inside, like you have a buildup of plaque, or this is when they check your, oh my gosh, I've lost my words today, guys. When they check your, what in the world? Anyway, I'll think of it when we're in class, hopefully. But anyway, if the internal conditions are kind of rough internally in the cells, the platelets will start to stick to them, and then you'll have this kind of buildup. And once you have enough of a buildup, if that blood clot loosens, it travels through your blood system. Eventually, it'll get to a point where it can't go anymore, and then you have this kind of stoppage of blood flow. People take blood thinners for these. You can even take aspirin, but they can potentially be pretty dangerous. And then you have kind of the opposite of this, bleeding disorders, where the platelets don't work. Thrombocytopenia is where you don't, for whatever reason, have platelets, usually some kind of genetic issue. You can have impaired liver function, so the liver doesn't produce the chemical that helps the blood to coagulate. So again, this kind of stops the chemistry behind it. And then hemophilia, which we've talked about in biology. This is, again, another genetic disorder, and you don't have the clotting factors just don't work. And so once you start bleeding, it's hard to get the bleeding to stop. It takes much longer than it should, so you end up losing a lot more blood than you should. Okay. Wow, I can't believe I forgot that word. Okay. Anyway, hopefully it will come to me. So ask questions as always, and I will see you guys later.